Madagascar, an island of unique plants and ancient cultures. But in October 2025, its capital was the scene of something far less exotic: mass Gen Z protests, soldiers refusing orders, and a sudden military takeover that has left the whole country and the region holding its breath. Today on Afri Facts, we unpack what happened, who's in charge now, why people protested, and what the rest of Africa should be watching next. Quick headline summary. In mid-October 2025, Colonel Michael Randrianirina, commander of an elite CAPSAT unit, led soldiers into Antananarivo and announced that the armed forces were taking control of the country. Reuters, President Andry Rajoelina fled the country amid the unrest and was later impeached by lawmakers. The military suspended or dissolved several national institutions and said it would oversee a transition lasting perhaps 18 months to 2 years before new elections. Short bio. Who is Michael Randrianirina? Randrianirina is a career officer from the CAPSAT elite unit, the same unit that played a decisive role in Madagascar's politics before, including in the 2009 rise of Rajoelina. He is described in reports as a 50-something colonel with prior postings in the South and a history of falling into and out of favor with the political leadership. In 2023, he was arrested over an alleged mutiny charge and later given a suspended sentence. He returned to service in 2024 and emerged as a vocal critic of Rajoelina. The long and short of why people were in the streets. The protests were led largely by young people, often described as Gen Z Madagascar, demanding better access to water, electricity, jobs, and education, and protesting a pattern of corruption and heavy-handed security responses. Demonstrations intensified after clashes with security forces that left dozens dead and hundreds injured, according to humanitarian sources and UN figures cited in news reports. These grievances were not just about service delivery. They tapped into wider frustration with elite politics and a sense that promises of economic revival had failed to reach most Malagasy families, making the protests both immediate power, water, and structural governance opportunity. How the takeover unfolded. Weeks of protests, youth-led demonstrations around Antananarivo and elsewhere, escalating after violent crackdowns. AP News key moment, CAPSAT breaks ranks. On or around 12th 14th of October, CAPSAT elements refused orders to fire on protesters and instead moved into the capital to protect demonstrators. Their presence was decisive. Wikipedia, Rajoelina flees. President Andry Rajoelina left the country citing safety concerns. His absence created a political vacuum that Parliament then filled by voting to impeach him. Military announcement. Colonel Randrianirina publicly announced that the armed forces were taking charge, suspended key institutions, the Senate, the High Constitutional Court, electoral bodies, and said a transitional timetable would be followed. The role of CAPSAT and the military dynamics. CAPSAT is an elite and politically influential military unit. Its decision to side with protesters, or at least to refuse to suppress them, changed the balance of power inside the security forces. Police and gendarmerie reportedly withdrew support for the president as well. That split in state security enabled a relatively rapid and low bloodshed seizure of key government sites. It's important to note that this was not an army-wide coup in the classical sense of a coordinated high command takeover. Rather, it was an elite unit moving decisively at a time when the president had lost political legitimacy and popular support. Wikipedia. Immediate consequences at home. Institutions suspended. The military announced suspension of several constitutional bodies and control of government functions, leaving the National Assembly as the one major civil institution initially left intact. Security and civil liberties. Curfews, checkpoints, and military control of public spaces were reported. Media access and independent reporting can be constrained in such moments, raising concerns about information flow and human rights monitoring. International and local NGOs are already calling for protection of civilians and accountability for past violence. Al Jazeera, economy and services. Madagascar already faces deep poverty and fragile public services. Political instability risks worsening food insecurity, foreign investment pullback, tourism collapse, and interruption of aid flows. These are not abstract risks. Madagascar's economy is highly vulnerable to shocks. International reactions and regional implications. As of now, mid-October 2025, international responses were cautious and varied. Regional bodies and Western governments typically condemn unconstitutional changes of power, call for a return to constitutional order, and may consider sanctions or suspending cooperation. But responses can be muted if the takeover has broad popular backing or if the region prioritizes stability. For neighboring Indian Ocean and African states, Madagascar's instability risks spillovers, refugee flows, disrupted trade, and diminished regional security cooperation. Madagascar's unique biodiversity and conservation projects could also be endangered if funding and governance falter. Is this a repeat of history? How unique is Madagascar's case? Madagascar has a history of coups and power shifts. The island's politics have seen military and extra-constitutional interventions before. That historical pattern matters because it shapes both elites' calculations and popular expectations about what a transition looks like. CAPSAT itself has been central to earlier political changes. What to watch next? Who actually governs? Pay attention to whether Randrianirina forms a council, brings civilians into the transitional government, or rules via military decree. The composition of any transitional administration will indicate whether the military intends a short, technically managed transition or a longer authoritarian rewrite. Timetable for elections. The military has publicly suggested 18 months to 2 years before elections, but pledges can change. Watch for roadmaps, constitutional changes, and the inclusion-exclusion of main political actors. AP News, international pressure and incentives, aid, sanctions, diplomatic recognition, and regional mediation will all influence outcomes. Donors and neighbors often use those levers to push for quicker returns to civil rule. Al Jazeera, humanitarian markers, food prices, fuel and power availability, and NGO access are immediate indicators of how ordinary Malagasy people will fare in the weeks ahead. Madagascar's 2025 military takeover is a stark reminder that unmet expectations, especially among the young, can quickly become political forces. Whether this moment becomes a brief reset or the start of a longer military rule depends on choices made in the next weeks by soldiers, politicians, civil society, and external partners. For the people of Madagascar, the core questions remain. Will services improve? Will accountability be upheld? And who will write the next chapter of their country's democracy?